Welcome to the Health Daily Show, your go-to where leaders, founders, and investors share insights on growth, innovation, and business building. I'm Chitra Nabat, your host. Joining us today is Jonathan Machado, SamsungNEXT Managing Director. Jonathan, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Jonathan, tell us about SamsungNEXT, your firm, and what's unique about your investing approach.
Sure. So we are the Samsung Electronics VC arm. And in the past 3 years, we've been deploying this strategy that I think is pretty unique in the CVC landscape. In a nutshell, we've built a model that is no proof. In other words, there's no reason to say no if you're the entrepreneur. And how did we do that? We've went around this small check approach, high velocity, which allows us to have no impact on the negative side on the company, whether it's too much room on the cap table, all sorts of rights that CVC traditionally asks from entrepreneurs that have negative signals for the rest of the industry. And so we've minimized all the downsides of working with any corporate, and Samsung specifically. And on the other end, we've built this platform team that allows our companies to benefit from everything Samsung, as one of the largest corporates in the world, has to offer, as well as help them outside of Samsung. And so I would argue that typically we're never the most helpful investor on the cap table, but we're always the most helpful investor per capita.
Talk more about that operating and integration model between the Samsung business units and your corporate venture group in terms of aligning on strategy and contributing from both a linear and nonlinear perspective.
Sure. I think at a high level, most CVCs, you have this range of highly strategic to maybe very not strategic, right? And our group was designed to tackle the innovator dilemma that every large corporate, every group within the large corporate has, which is every VP, every EVP, and every large corporate, they have their KPI they got to hit the next quarter, the next 2 quarters, the next year. And as such, while they are driving, these massive companies to their success, they don't have the bandwidth, the capacity, the incentive to look outside of what's in front of them. And we need them focused on that. And so the notion of having this corporate group that requires the business unit's approval to make a partnership creates this deadlock. Well, there's a misaligned interest between the VC that is trying to innovate and try to possibly disrupt part of what the business unit is doing, and the business unit that's focused on the next 2 quarters of KPIs. And so SamsungNEXT was built in a way that we are fully independent from the business units. So we don't need their capital, we don't need their approval to make a deal, which actually makes them happier as well. Because when I show up with a deal that we want to make or we have made, there's no artificial pressure, nor on the startup or the business unit to make a partnership that doesn't make sense for any of them. Startup, minor investment from SamsungNEXT doesn't create this kind of shadow of we must work with Samsung to justify this investment. And the business unit is like, well, it's one of many investments SamsungNEXT has done, so we'll wait for the right moment to create this collaboration. So by splitting the forces and yet working closely, it makes sure that we only work together and combine the forces with startups when it makes sense for both sides and not creating any of these type of issues. The second thing it creates, which you mentioned with a linear value, which is while we are making investments in areas that are relevant for the business unit for the next quarter to a year or two, we also make these investments that even today it's hard to articulate why is this relevant for Samsung. But the reality is that we believe the best people to speak to about the future are not VCs, not consultants, but the folks who are building the future, the entrepreneurs. And so we want to have them help guide the leadership of Samsung into where we should develop into. And so we have multiple examples of bets we've made. At the time, if my team was dependent on someone at Samsung say, yes, do this deal, we would have never made it. Sure enough, 2-3 years later, BU shows up and like, hey, we need to play in X and Y. And then sure enough, we have 2-3 investments, top-notch CEOs that are ready to engage.
Give us an example. Give us an example of because basically what you're talking about is a bit of a bimodal and a present versus future horizon moonshot type of a strategy, right? And so give us an example of some of the outcomes that you've delivered taking this approach.
Sure. So I'll give you a few actually in healthcare and out of healthcare. So 2 of our bigger successes over the years of an investment that we ended up acquiring. One of them is a company called LoopPay, which is today the base of Samsung Pay. And number 2 is SmartThings, which is the IoT platform behind Samsung. And again, when those investments were made, the roadmap of the folks working on the fintech stuff at Samsung may have not been, okay, how do we end up using a phone for payments? Maybe yes, maybe no. But sure enough, when they were in it and wanted to get it done, we had the perfect company for them to absorb internally. In healthcare, we have, I would say, from infrastructure plays on the healthcare record side. Just yesterday, our chief medical officer, our head of global digital health, announced a partnership with BeWell. We've been bringing companies to Korea and to HQ around medical records for the past 4 years. First time brought a company over. What are we going to do with those records necessarily? There was no receiving end. But sure enough, 4 years later, now the hope is that every one of the many tens of millions of Samsung Health users will be able to own their records and begin a journey of owning their healthcare through these records. And so, and I would say one more thing about that, and this conference is a good example for this. Currently, in the past year, Samsung has been all into this healthcare initiative. Over the years, like in any initiative, like in any space, the support for different business unit, department has been going up and down. We were able in the SamsungNEXT side to stay consistent with our support in healthcare, acquire or invest in a pretty large portfolio of companies, and again, making them all ready for their opportune moment, which is now.
How do you define ROI? What are those metrics that you're held accountable to?
Yeah, so going back to the CVC, I would say general dilemma. First and foremostly, we're measured by results, by VC regular performance. And the reason for that is Samsung wants to engage with the best entrepreneurs out there. And so if, as a proxy of that, if we make good investment, we should expect good returns. So the best way to make sure that the companies we are bringing forward to the business units are the best in the space is to make sure that we align our interests with the entrepreneurs, with our fellow investors. And so we are first and foremost measured by results, ROI, can we make 3, 5x like any regular VC? In addition, so not, I would say, second tier and importantly, how does this influence the business unit? How do we influence, but influence, that's maybe the important piece here. Sure, we want to create partnerships. We want to eventually have Samsung acquire some of our companies. But more important than that, can we help guide the executives to make the right best, the right decision for Samsung? And so in order to make sure we don't create artificial partnership and waste people's time, the key focus for us is deliver insights back to the executives in Korea.
So bringing that together, what is Samsung's healthcare strategy and growth vision? And tying that into the startups, the founders that you're looking for, whether here at this conference or wherever,
Sure.
that are then supporting an additive to Samsung achieving that its healthcare vision.
Listen, 70% of US households have a Samsung device at home. If it's a fridge, if it's a washing machine, if it's a phone, it's a tablet, it's a TV, it's something. We have the largest consumer electronic footprint in the world. And we are shifting as an industry, we've been shifting, and it's I think a very good trend for a decentralized healthcare world where each one of us get to own our health, which is the way it should be. The only way we can prevent people from getting sick to begin with and to take care of themselves if we transition the responsibility from the healthcare system, from the center to the edges, to the people. And we are decentralized companies. We have very few assets in the center, but we have all the assets at the edge. And our vision for Samsung is to be able to allow anybody to take ownership of the healthcare, starting with the healthcare records, have all the algorithms, all the technology monitoring our health, helping us, first of all, be healthy and healthier through mindfulness, sleep, meditation, nutrition, fitness, but also prevent us from getting sick in the right moments. So, us and every, of our competitors have incredible sensors on these watches, able to create these alerts and intervene in the right moment with the right care pathways to never ideally get sick. And so I think in this vision, Samsung could be a major player in keeping us healthier for longer and improving our life.
And so then those portfolio companies, those founders that you might be looking for, what type of metrics, a bit into your investor pattern recognition of the type of investments, the type of portfolio companies you're looking for, which also then support what you just outlined for Samsung's healthcare strategy.
Yeah, so listen, working with a company like Samsung, we have 320,000 employees. it's a very large corporate, you need to be a visionary that can do a few things. Number one, if you want someone that can guide people that run a multi-$100 billion P&L, you need to have a vision for your company and the type of person that can carry and build, a unicorn is a cliche, but a significant business, right? And so we look for people who have these big visions, transformatives ideally, using the, cutting edge technologies, and people that have, I would say, this multi-dimensional approach to solving problems. Because in healthcare, there's no silver bullets, right? It's not one thing that's going to be enough to get healthcare where it needs to be. So our devices can play a role into it. Software needs to play a role into it, and AI, of course, people, doctors, nurses. And so we look for people who understand this ecosystem, understand how our devices could play in this ecosystem and can help bring this forward to improve outcomes, reduce costs, and increase access to care.
Leadership. In life, career, business, there are rules, norms, codes to how things are done. Where have you been a code breaker and how did you do it?
It's funny, I think the shorter answer would be, where did I not break rules more than anything else? I'm Israeli, and so rules are like usually a suggestion for many of us. But I would say, very, very interestingly, the culture clash to an extent between Israelis and Koreans, or even Israelis and Americans to some extent, really plays the role of SamsungNEXT versus or vis-a-vis our bigger organization. Because for a large corporate to work, if it's Google, if it's Samsung, if it's whoever, you need to have this hierarchy. You need to have some form of kind of following the leaders and doing what everybody, to guide this massive ship towards where it has to go. But our goal inside of the bigger organization is not to follow the rules, not to follow the leaders in that sense, but actually be that rebellious group that tries to do things differently. And so I would say the best example, I won't get to the specific details, but we had this investment during COVID has just, I'm talking like March 2020, and this investment I want to make, and the world is shutting down. So our president back then approves the deal, and we go to the leadership there and like, listen, we should not, we should rethink about a bunch of things, doing deals or not. Let's wait with that. So in my head, the president comes back to me, he's like, sorry, Machado, we shouldn't do this deal right now. I'm like, no, we should go back to them and tell them they're wrong and we should do it. And we got the deal done. It's one of our better performing portfolio companies right now. But I think culturally speaking, inside of any big corporate, Samsung especially, the notion of like going back to the top leadership and saying, no, you guys are wrong. And despite you think that's how we think we should do it, we should do it the opposite way. And I'm not anybody too important in that, scale of folks at Samsung. And I think that's kind of a DNA match between my, I guess, Israeli tendencies and where SamsungNEXT is supposed to play inside of a bigger corporate.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.